morning and welcome to what I hope is going to be a very insightful session. So what we want to do in this session is two things. We want to address what AI means, but more importantly, we want to address what AI means to you and me and how to make it fit for purpose. I'm delighted to have with me two special guests. I have my first guest is Mark Starfield. He's Group Head of HR Program Systems at Vodafone. And my second guest is Kishore Sengupta. He's Professor of Operations at the Judgment School, University of Cambridge. And I have introduced myself. My name is Angela Salmeron. I am an IDC analyst and I lead the European Future of Work. And this is a panel discussion. And before we head off the panel discussion, let me introduce this subject with a few concepts. The first one is the augmented worker. And I'm going just to give you a fictional character. His name is Tom. Tom works in a manufacturing company in the shop floor. And you know what? Intelligent technologies are helping him to do his job. And I said here 3 pictures of his job throughout the day. Clockwise, he's using AI and AR glasses to, by the way, I forgot to tell you that he looks after the maintenance of equipment. So with AI, AR glasses, he can identify problems in a particular machinery, in a particular engine, and fix it. He can also use robotics, something called exoskeletons, to lift heavy boxes and move them from one place to the other. And finally, again related to equipment maintenance, he's using AI to proactively identify problems in the engines before they even happen, preventative maintenance. And you know what? What I've just described with Tom is a reality that in actual fact, 1 in 2 companies are not either unaware of or even unprepared. And I have to say, this is quite an alarming situation, reality. 2 implications I can think of right now. The first one is that only last year, IDC estimated that 29 billion euros, this is revenue lost because companies didn't have the right talent internally. The second implication is that if you as a company, if you don't have the right talent, actually you are not an attractive employer, right? You don't have the right technology, you are not attractive, again, the right talent. What are the implications as well in terms of having a modern workforce? In IDC, we think that skills is really the new currency. It's not your titles or jobs. You as an individual within a company, you need to embrace lifelong learning. And that means that you are going to be constantly upskilling or being reskilled to be employable throughout your career. That should be part of your career development. Like Tom, you don't need to be an expert in AI and automation in order to utilize these technologies for your own purpose. Tech fits people and not vice versa. The CIO of a manufacturing company actually told me that tech is as good as the people who use it. And my final concept I want to address now before I head off to the panel discussion is tech for good. I like what I heard recently about obviously using technology for a good purpose, and that purpose having 3 P's. Profit, of course, because you are a business, and so is people and the planet. And without further delay, let me open now the session to our 2 guests, because as I said, I'm hoping we are going to have a very, very insightful discussion. So I'm going to start with you, Kishore. My question to you is, I described earlier about the augmented worker. Obviously, that could be targeted to probably a low skill type of worker. We also see intelligent technologies targeting the high-tech roles. Let's say that I am, a solicitor or a doctor. Does AI affect me? And if so, how will that impact my role? Do I need to feel worried, threatened? And what can I do to remain employable again throughout my career?
Thank you, Angela, and thank you for the very interesting and provocative question. And I also think it's a very loaded one. The way I would say is this, that if you think about a technology which is about 100 years old, which is telephone, and you had the operators, and then you had an invention called the Strauger switches, and what happened is that the operators essentially disappeared, and they were replaced by mechanical switches which connected telephone lines. So that was a complete replacement. Now, are lawyers going to disappear? Are doctors going to disappear? Physicians going to disappear? I think not. But I think here's what's going to happen. So if you think about a cognitive robot, it's actually pretty good at taking a piece of judgment, a fairly complicated piece of judgment from the Supreme Court, and figuring out what it actually means, and therefore what's good law and what's bad law in that particular judgment. So I think those kinds of things, what they mean is that lawyers who used to focus on trying to do good law versus bad law will now suddenly have to think about what else they do with their careers. Similarly, a lot of physicians have told me that robots, and they pack artificial intelligence, a lot of robots actually do surgery better than they do. In fact, one of them was mentioning that she left the profession and joined a startup because she found that the robots were going to do liver surgery better than she could as a highly talented professional. So what I'm going to say is that doctors and lawyers will never disappear because it's a noble profession of the law, and certainly it's our human bodies. What's going to happen is that just like the ones who ran telephone exchanges and made them work, the job descriptions, the roles, and the skills will fundamentally change with AI being much more mainstream than it is now.
Thank you, sure. And now I'm going to ask my second guest, Mark, a question about the HR business function. It's interesting, right? Now we're going from lawyers and solicitors to the HR, role. There is no other business function within a company which is more human than HR. So the question is, how can really AI augment this role? That would be question number one. Probably no, because you're in the profession, you can give us some visibility. What are the use cases? And if so, if we have identified use cases, what will be the considerations? What will be the questions that we need to ask ourselves before we really invest in AI? Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Angela. Just building on Kishore's point, for me, AI at its core is, in an HR sense, is automation, digital machine learning. And for me, this is an opportunity to kind of create new and different ways of working, internal mobility that allows people to focus on that knowledge worker space and more on external and internal customer needs. And for me, ultimately, there will be large productivity, engagement, and simplification improvements that could not be more important in the new future of work. Let me answer your specific question around key things of how AI can augment the HR function. So I don't think anybody in this conference isn't in a stage of either looking to adopt digital strategies or implement new technologies on that basis. So for Vodafone, we're also changing our company strategy, become a tech comms company. And that means we need to really think differently about how we attract, reskill, develop our human capital. And a big part of that is saying, how do we focus on new products and services which imply a different approach to the skills that we need? Some of you might have seen, we've just recently announced that we're looking to recruit 7,000 software engineers. So it's the first important use case for us is to create that expectation and experience of a tech organization. So think about current processes where people apply for jobs. We want to change that to a rich digital experience, which means that you go in, and in the past, it was this laborious process of registering and having a huge amount of jobs that aren't relevant for your area. Now we want to drag their CV, and Eightfold allows us to read those skills. And then you get personal and purposeful jobs based on your skills. And we basically immediately create that link to our employee value proposition of being a tech comms company, creating a rich experience. behind that is how do we then allow us, how do we move from getting more people to actually go from looking at jobs to actually converting to applying for those jobs? So we got over 800,000 applicants a year. So the first time I think many of your potential employees will look at your organization and experience AI will be in that first touch and talent attraction. And behind that, you will need AI to actually manage that type of volume. So how do we make sure that we've got the right good recommendations for shortlists, but also that we think about D&I? How do we kind of make sure that there's no bias in terms of what's being presented to line managers, for example? And we're going to use the AI behind this to mask the identity of the individuals. For me, the second big place this plays in is in what I call a skills ecosystem. And it's really important and critical that our employees understand where they are on their skills journey, what are the skills the organization needs, and how will they play part of that journey. And important to that is having an environment where skills are dynamically updated. Many of you will have invested in job catalogs, skills, and learning intervention, which impart certain skills. But those are often outdated by the time they go live. So we want to use AI to say that there is important skills that we want to prioritize and we want to recommend for our employees. But we also want to allow them to understand what else is out there. Also, we need to adjust our approach in terms of resourcing and thinking of talent pools based on what's happening in the wider market. So I think it's important that we create that environment where we can dynamically adjust to what's happening in the market. Also have the ability for employees to create talent profiles, which in our sense gives us the ability to use AI and some machine learning to do very specific and targeted recommendations of what we want people to try and focus and learn on. So create that culture of learning and connect people to collaboration spaces. Sometimes that would include mentors in different areas. Next bit I think that's important is what I call industrialize the infrastructure. So API-driven integrations that is future-proof. That means that we can grow and adjust to whatever other applications we want to put in our environment, but also be able to respond more in an agile way to changes. Here, a good use case for people in HR would be being able to use analytics to predict and inform strategic workforce plans and potentially more importantly, operational workforce plans. So that informs the recruitment function, also informs learning and talent development. For me, it's important that we create a comprehensive global multidisciplinary approach to standardization, which in our world is really important around democratizing opportunities, the language we use, making sure everybody understands the skills that we need in the future, but also what are those opportunities. And in the new world, people can work from all over different places. My last part to your question in terms of key things I think you would consider if you before you buy is understand your use cases deeply and understand the potential users for that. And then how AI will fit into your current environment and digital strategy. So what are the integration implications? And do you have the right data foundation, which will take quite a little bit of time? And then things like security and privacy. But ultimately, it's all about what is that experience you want to create and how do you link that to your employee value proposition? Thank you, Angela.
Brilliant. So, Mark, related to the employee experience and more thinking bigger about the outcomes of investing, obviously, in AI. Normally, and that has been the case now already for a number of years, that when you invest in, I'm thinking generally, right, automation, AI, machine learning is always the hard dollar that is seen as a primary target. And so is the immediacy as well of results. We want results now. So again, given that you've been through that journey, what are for you the key outcomes when you invest again in AI?
For me, the key things that I would include in terms of some of those benefits we'd expect is, first one is kind of increased shared service center penetration is the language we use as a foundation for global and intelligent business services. And this is for us about effectiveness, experience, and operational cost reductions. All three, not just one of those, otherwise you won't get the value. The next part, I think, is reduce our external talent attraction spend. And this is about less reliance on external specialist recruiters, but also the ability for us to manage intelligently and personalize our talent marketing budget and functionality. A really key part for many organizations now is to reduce that time to hire, to create the right experience for people. And that reduction in time to hire links to your point earlier on, Angela, in terms of the loss of productivity and opportunity. Employee retention, we've got a specific around making sure that we have less regretted losses, which speaks to the hard skills, but also creating an environment where people feel we are actively investing in their future and how they develop. Then we focus on kind of reducing the HR process costs. So here's really about the amount of time HR BPs are spending on administrative things which you could possibly take out of the mix. Another big one for us in terms of using AI in the skills and linking that to learning is a reduction in our overall learning spend, which might sound counterintuitive, but with more personal and targeted learning and nudges and recommendations, we believe we can do that. Then a reduction in our contingent workers spend. So more internal focused, allowing us to use our internal people for some of the newer products. I sometimes talk about Destiny 1.0, about insourcing those key skills. Reduction in kind of the cost of localized career pages and the associated costs. But ultimately, if I sum it up, I mean, I like the language of kind of building the human spirit of technology. And for us, as an inclusive and growth environment where everybody has the opportunity to thrive. And there's three key pillars to that is an agile and efficient operating model, which I think AI enables. Diverse talent and future-ready skills, which is an absolute focus for us. And then a digital and personalized experience, which speaks about our employee value proposition, the way we want people to think and feel about our company.
Thank you, Mark. In actual fact, and my next question is related to agility, but the question is for Kishore. Right. So yes, indeed. No, the world we are today is moving at fast pace, and obviously that's requires, Mark pointed, no, that requires an agile organization. And as Mark pointed, no, it's about matching talent with business opportunities and business requirements. So the question to you, Kishore, is what are the implications on, no, this is no for our listeners, no, for the HR department, what are the implications in terms of recruitment and talent management? And how can AI help, no, in that challenge?
So maybe connect a couple of points that Mark made to try to think through your question. I love the point about the Mark made about how AI allows us to deepen the pool of talent and widen it at the same time, because that takes real effort. And a lot of talent is frankly like looking for needles in a haystack. And with better AI and better search capabilities and better sort of what you might call discriminant capabilities that AI will produce, we can actually get a bit quicker and a bit better to the unique talent that we really need. And that actually makes a big difference in most professional service organizations. So I think having AI in that certainly helps a lot. I think the second point I would make is a little bit different, and this gets to the skills that Mark referred to. I think the real question, at least for me, is this: how long are the skills that you need now are going to last? So I referred to a conversation that I was part of. There was a chief of a very large insurance company, and there was a person who was a consultant in one of the big four organizations, and they were talking about how they needed to replace 5,000 analysts in this particular organization. So imagine the amount of work that would require to replace them, but also look at the cost, the human cost of doing this. So I would like to connect this with a phrase that I think it was used by Paul Polman, and he talked about human doings versus human beings. And I think what he was referring to is a focus on skills. Now, beneath the skills are actually people. And the skills may be outdated after a certain point of time. The skills may be not what the organization needs. But human beings are actually quite adaptable. And they are, I would say, that if we manage them well, they will not only come along in the journey of changing the skills and upgrading the skills, you can actually make it a lot better. So perhaps one way of thinking about recruitment and AI is this, that we recruit people, we attract people who recognize that the skills are great as they are, but these skills need to change over a period of time. The organization will do everything it can to get them on a path, a trajectory where they remain current, relevant, and highly sort of so not only contribute to the organization, but also, frankly, retain currency in the job market. And I think that if recruitment or HR adopts that sort of a stance, towards recruitment, I think what you get is a self-selected group of people who will be not only more agile, but will move the organization in a way that the organization is a lot more responsive, as opposed to simply recruiting for skills, which then get outdated, and you have a lot of people relying on those skills, and they have every incentive actually not to move the organization forward. So I think that's the way to go. So not only look at the wider pool and of talent, deepen this through the kinds of digital experiences and other experiences that Mark was talking about, but also focus on the human being rather than the human doings. And if you put it together, I think what we get is a group of people who can then give the organizational agility, which perhaps it may not have if you simply recruit for skills. So these are perhaps some ways in which an organization can move forward in the age of AI.
Two thoughts came into my mind as you were talking. One was something that the chief HRO of a top company shared with me. She said, "My people are my most expensive asset, but also the most adaptable one." And she also introduced me to the concept of KPIs, the key behavioral indicators, thinking that, as you rightly said, not about the human doings, but human beings, right? It's about their behavior. You recruit someone because that particular person, is going to take your company forward. So completely, I love the thought you shared with us. Mark, any thoughts, or shall we move to the next question?
Now, Angela, for me, the key thing is I think employees and potential employees expect a personalized experience, a kind of consumer grade experience. And we need to use AI to kind of make that personalized experience, which is purposeful around jobs or skills or learning opportunities, and then link that to your employee value proposition. That's what we can do with AI, I think.
My next question is a topic really close to my heart, is EDI, equality, diversity, inclusion. A topic that obviously is a moral imperative, we know, but we know also is instrumental for competitive edge differentiation. We know companies that have a diverse workforce actually perform better. So the question to both of you, I'm going to open the question to both of you, is how can AI help drive EDI goals? And linked to that is something we are all aware of, right? Is the unconscious bias that human beings, which is natural, right, brings into the equation when we try to have, a diverse, equal, inclusive culture. How can AI help address that bias?
I mean, at a very tactical but very important level is we can mask the shortlist. So what our line manager are receiving is a CV that is masked. There's no way to know which person is applying for that. And it's solely based on somebody's skills. And I think there's good research to show if you make the attraction process simpler and there's less complexity in that, people feel more confident about applying. So in some research, females don't apply if they don't meet all the criteria. What we want to use AI for is to show somebody you meet most of it. These are the bits you're missing. So maybe you can focus on those a little bit later. So at a tactical level, mask that. It's not possible to be biased at that stage in terms of, at least on the shortlet side. I think that's an important shift for us.
So that's a really interesting point Mark talked about, which is about creating a shortlist. From many standpoints, I think the shortlist is really what matters, because if you have a really good shortlist which has the right elements of what you might call equity, diversity, and inclusion, then of course you can move forward. But I would like to make a more general point. We think about these technologies as great levelers. They are sort of great enablers, or they are impediments. I don't think that's a particularly useful way to think about it. If you let's now look at AI and diversity and inclusion. I think the evidence is mixed, that there is a significant chunk of AI which is simply automated what you might call inequality or biases, and there's plenty of literature on that. On the other hand, I think it's also useful to focus on what could be, and if you focus on that, perhaps there are a couple of things we can say. One is that human beings are the ones who are actually writing the algorithms which drive AI. What can we do to make sure that the algorithms that we create do not automatically incorporate the biases, which after all are part of how we think. So that's number one, right? Number two is, what can we do to actually make the algorithms a little bit less of a black box? In other words, open the algorithms up to a bit of scrutiny, not in a surveillance sense, but actually trying to understand, what are the unintended consequences of these algorithms and how can we make them better? So there are at least a couple of things that we can do to make the algorithms better, to make AI better in such a way that we actually get to the goal of equality, diversity, and inclusion. So to summarize, let me make 2 points. One is that it's not a given that just using AI will get us there. I think that's a bit of a Goldilocks bit of thinking, which often gets us into trouble. On the other hand, if we do this consciously, and if we do this in a way that we know that we want to get there, and do it in such a way that when we write the code, when we scrutinize what actually comes out in terms of outputs, and it changes accordingly, then of course the world becomes a somewhat better place. And usually the algorithms where I've seen this work, where algorithms have worked well and where there has been enough scrutiny and surveillance, there are people who are sort of appointed to oversee the algorithms and oversee what comes out of the algorithms. And if you do that, I think you can get to the point where EDI can actually be bolstered in a very, very good way by AI.
No, thanks, Kishore. I mean, and things I'd add to it. I mean, I think AI on its own is a blunt instrument. You've got a mix of different things. So, for example, now we're looking to ask applicants before they come, can they share their D&I preferences? And we want to use that to try and inform where we recruit from, how we take that data. But then we can also have the information in the background to say, is this algorithm giving us the right return? Are we focusing our campaigns in the right area to attract more of a diverse population? And then we spend quite a bit of time with Eightfold in terms of, as you say, lifting up this black box a little bit and saying, how does the algorithm actually work? And given this is a European conference, that's really important for markets like Germany, where we need to convince in a positive way the Workers' Council that this isn't creating a different bias. And is creating the right environment. So I think there's a mix of ways of approaching it, but I think AI gives you a starting point, and the data behind that allows you to adjust and inform how you approach this going forward.
I can see now we are addressing transparency, fairness, accountability, regulation, work councils you mentioned, Mark. And obviously inside organizations, there needs to be a governance framework that ensures that AI is used responsibly. Any final thought about how to use tech and AI for good?
I would like to say two things, right? One is that AI can be wonderful, because anything that potentially could be structured will be structured using AI, which I think for a lot of knowledge workers means that we don't do things that we actually don't want to do. So AI done properly can actually enrich our jobs and enable us to recruit the right talent. So that's one. The second thing second point I want to make is none of this is automatic. It requires a really intelligent and enlightened mix of what you might call the use of technology, the application of technology, the development of technology, and a general consensus that we are not going to use this in a way that is bad for society in general. So that's a fairly broad set of parameters. I hope that shapes the debate, and I hope that gives us a sort of sense of perspective on how to move forward. And I hope that gets us off the bandwagon which says that this is fantastic or this is a disaster. It's neither. It's what we make of it.
For me, AI allows us to create the future, the different experience that people have, the different ways we as HR professionals support the companies and the environments we work in.
Thank you very much for being part of this. And thank you as well to our listeners, to everyone who joined this particular session.